Bonjour. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. It's wonderful to see some of the familiar faces here. Alicia Grow, I see some folks that we've had opportunities to spend time with. But thank you, Laura, always for giving us that tech info and just keeping things running smooth for us. So as folks continue to join, I would love it if you all could tell us who you are in the chat room. Just give us your name, the tribe that you work with, or the state. That would be wonderful. And just for those of you that know, our target audience with the Capacity Building Center for Tribes is tribal child welfare professionals. But there are times like this when we're delivering webinars that we think, you know what, this might be good information for our state child welfare professionals. So we invited them to attend this webinar with us today, actually this two-part series. And, you know, we all know that when we work collaboratively, we can all work together and help improve those outcomes, you know, especially through recruitment and licensing of Native resource families. So just real quick, in this two-part webinar series, we will learn from the tribal nations about their efforts to recruit and retain Native resource families. One thing many of us can agree upon is that keeping children within communities and remaining connected to their families and culture helps minimize the impacts of trauma when placed in out-of-home care, as well as improve outcomes. So let's get started. Today's webinar is part one, as I described with the two-part series. This one is Native Families for Native Children, Recruiting and Training Resource Families in Nebraska. We get to learn how tribes in Nebraska successfully engaged and recruited Native resource families. Our presenters are going to highlight work from Native Families for Native Children, otherwise known as NF4NC. And this is recruitment efforts in the testing of a foster parent training curriculum. The curriculum is the Trauma-Informed Partnering for Safety and Permanence-Model Approach to Partnership and Parenting, otherwise known as TIPS-MAPP NA. So I'm going to let them introduce, but I also want everybody to know just how wonderful these individuals are. I've had opportunities to work with them. So I just want to give my blessings to Misty Flowers, the Executive Director for the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition, Jill Holt, who's going to help with some of the technical. She's the Training and Education Director for the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition, and Chiara Cournoyer. She is the Vice President of the NICWC Board of Directors. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Misty, now, so you can continue to introduce yourselves. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jackie. I apologize. Did we talk about this during, are we saying a prayer?
You absolutely can start it if you feel the need. Absolutely. If you want to center our participants.
Sure. We can do that. Thank you for that opportunity. I am so my name is Misty Flowers. I am an enrolled member of the Santee Sioux Nation, and we always start everything with a prayer, and it helps me. And yeah, so I ask you to join, and however it is that you pray, with your mind, your heart, and however it is. So I'm going to turn my camera off here real quick. Hantukashra wakantaka. Date dopa na unchimaka. Wamakashka yate wopi da tankun kini chiapi tunkashida betu kinde. Na ambetu kinde tunkashida twe wasi da hipi. Wichozani kawake. Na wo hakniga na wo abedeza na wo iushkia ota head ehanaka ye tunkashida hanaku tuahe na tioshpai untawabi. Oyate awasi na kuntu kashida oyate itanchapi wokachniga na woabedeza tunkashida na chinchapi na hunkake owasina awangwi chakapie tunkashida na wichoza ni kawake na wokachniga ota head ehnake tunkashida na wapia ota head ehnake na wopida chichia medaki awasi. Thank you for that. So we can go to the next slide. My name is Misty Thomas Flowers. I'm a member of the Santee Sioux Nation and currently the executive director for the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition. And we're going to talk more about like the NF4NC project and TIPS-MAPP, and so you'll learn more about that and what that means is to be as an advisor, consultant, and then as a trainer for TIPS-MAPP. So I'll turn it over to Chiara. She can introduce herself.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chiara Cournoyer-Brugier, and I'm a member of the Yankton Sioux tribe in South Dakota. As they said earlier, I'm the NICWC board vice president. And for the NF4NC grant that we'll kind of be talking about today, I was the principal investigator on that grant for a while. And also initially I was the grant coordinator for that grant when I first started with the Winnebago tribe. So, and then I'm also a TIPS-MAPP NA trainer. So welcome everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jill Holt. I am, as Jackie said, the Training and Education Director for NICWC. Previously, I have worked with the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska as their ICWA specialist, as well as Nebraska DHHS as the ICWA program coordinator. So ICWA has been primarily more what I've been doing, but I have been working with Misty on becoming developed as a trainer of leaders for the Native American TIPS-MAPP version, as well as caring for our own. And so I'm excited to be here with these ladies to present this information to you. And they have the meat and potatoes of this presentation, but I'll be talking at you a little bit later. Thanks, welcome.
Thank you, Jill. And we can, yep, thank you. I believe this is Jill.
Yeah, it's still me, you're right. All right, so we're going to go through, this is sort of our roadmap for today. We're going to talk with you about the history and background of Native Families for Native Children and the approach that was used in implementing that and working with the tribes and 2 states, both Nebraska and Iowa, as well as then some ways that we worked with the Native communities throughout this project, the lessons learned, things that we know went well, that sort of thing. There are some additional impacts that have resulted from this project that we entered into. It's several years now, and we'll have a timeline here in a minute. But Misty and Chiara were from the beginning of this project really very instrumental in it, so they have a lot more knowledge on that. I'll talk with you a little bit about the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition and how we're continuing the work today from that initial 5-year Diligent Recruitment Grant. And then we'll go into more about the curricula for fostering kinship caregivers, and then some of the critical tools and components of the TIPS-MAPP program itself.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our timeline leading up to the NF4NC grant. So the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition initially, before we became a nonprofit organization, was a grassroots organization. That kind of started around 2008, meeting with the 4 tribes in Nebraska. Other tribal partners, state partners were welcome to those meetings. And so we just kind of would meet fairly regularly and talk about ICWA and a lot of other, sometimes we talk about cases, but a lot of it was just to help support each other and support ICWA. And then 2009, there was actually a grant that was awarded to a local university, Briarcliff University. And the title of that grant was the Siouxland Indian Child Welfare Traineeship Project. The goal of that was to provide scholarships to Native American students who were interested in child welfare and social work. And so I actually was a recipient of one of those awards. And Misty was on the advisory board for that grant at the time. And so that kind of, led to in like 2010, 2011, one of our other students who were awarded that traineeship we had to do a change process as part of like our education process through the social work program. And so she picked the Native American Foster Home Initiative, and we just called that NAFI, kind of brought the local partners together, local tribes. We had a big meeting, to talk about the disproportionate number of Native American children in the child welfare system and in foster care. And so out of that, grew this seed. So in 2012, there was a grant notice that came out for the Diligent Recruitment Grants, and tribes became eligible applicants for that. And so we brought that team back together to really help work on this grant. Misty had a big piece in that. Heather Craig Olson, she's one of the professors at Briarcliff University, had a big part in that. Julia Kleinschmidt, she was a professor from University of Iowa. And so they had a big hand in this, as well as a lot of our other partners in writing for this grant, bringing the tribes and all the partners together. And then we actually got funded. So we got that grant awarded. And that funding started in October 1st of 2013. So it was, the grant was titled, and the program was called Native Families for Native Children. We just say NF4NC. It was a 5-year diligent recruitment grant, and it was funded by the Children's Bureau. And so the 4 tribes in Nebraska were all partners, but the Winnebago was the lead. And so with taking the lead, they had previously been awarded a grant. And so it just worked out that it made sense for Winnebago to take the lead on this, along with our other partners, including the 4 tribes in Nebraska. We had Nebraska DHHS, so the state of Nebraska. We had Iowa DHS. Children's Alliance of Kansas was one of our partners, and they were the ones who owned the rights to the curriculum, the TIPS-MAPP curriculum used in the state. And then the University of Nebraska-Lincoln they were our evaluation team for the grant. And so we had a lot of partners involved, and each one of the sites received funding, like sub-awards, to be able to have recruiters funded in those in their service area. And so our main goal for this grant was the recruitment, training, licensing, and retention of Native foster parents for placement of Native children. So our approach was to recruit, license, and support our Native American homes. We needed more resource families in the service area. And so a goal was that 80% of Native children in out-of-home care would be placed with Native families. So that was one of the big goals of the grant. We wanted to build cooperation and collaboration among the NF4NC child welfare partners, which included the tribe, Omaha tribe, Ponca, Santee, Winnebago, Iowa DHS, Nebraska DHS, and Children's Alliance. We wanted to empower the workers in our tribal communities and the states to recruit, train, license, and support Native resource families in accord with the traditions, needs, and resources of their communities. So this hadn't really been, there wasn't a lot of recruitment and training and licensing taking place. There was a real big need for homes. And so we wanted to really build that team and empower these workers to be able to do the work, right? Provide training to them and that support network. Another big part of it was revising and field testing. The currently utilized, it was PS-MAPP, and then it turned into TIPS-MAPP because they added the trauma informed to that curriculum. Again, we're going to define that later. It's quite a mouthful, but this is the curriculum that we use to train foster parents. And this was because that's what was used in the state of Nebraska and some of our surrounding states. So we had a chance to really make some revisions to this and do that field testing with some of our foster families, our potential foster families, and we had forms, we did feedback, with each of our sessions. The trainers also, the leaders of those groups also gave feedback each session. As part of that field testing to really make sure that we were capturing what changes we wanted to make throughout. Another approach was educate. So we wanted to educate Native trainers from the program sites to conduct foster, adoptive, and kinship care training, support community leaders, and serve as consultants to agencies outside of Siouxland. And then the last piece of that was documenting and disseminating. So we wanted to make sure that we documented everything we did. We did a lot of dissemination at national conferences. We would go to NICWC and other conferences to disseminate, just some of our data, some of the work that we were doing and the results that we were getting. And so that was a piece of this as well. Next slide. So the main goal of NF4NC was that Native children would be raised in Native families. And that's huge, right? A lot of, we know that from the history, a lot of our Native children, after the boarding school era, would be placed in a lot of non-Native homes. And it really was just, a lack of licensed homes. And a lot of other reasons for that. So that was the goal. We wanted our Native children that had to be, if they weren't able to be with their biological families, if they were part of the system, we wanted them with Native families. The target population for that was around 250 to 400 enrolled or self-identified Native children. And we picked the Ponca service area because they have the largest service area out of the 4 Nebraska tribes. It's and then also the state of Iowa and Nebraska. There was counties in Iowa, counties in Nebraska, and then the Omaha, Winnebago, and Santee reservations were part of that service area. So some of the what we did for cultural responsiveness or to be culturally respectful, right? When we're working with Native communities, we have to work with them in a respectful way. And sometimes, our workers weren't always from the tribes that they were working in, within that service area. So we had to do a lot of learning about the community. And, sometimes that meant a little extra time that we had to spend on things. There was longer time frames for just, getting that paperwork done. Even formalizing the paperwork. A lot of the tribes that, a lot of our partners, I know specifically with the tribe that I was working with, had a couple different forms. It wasn't really formalized. And that they would use for this licensing process. And so that was part of the grant as well. We had to kind of, get our ducks in a row to be able to present this to the families and package it in a good way so that process was easier for them. So we had to work out our process. And then in working with the families, being respectful of their time and other commitments that they had come up. There was some resistance of us coming into their homes, being a child welfare agency and, what happened historically, a lot of, families tend to still kind of have that resistance and maybe a little bit of fear. having child welfare professionals come into their home. In some instances, there were delays in getting forms completed, just like health forms. For whatever reason, some people were a little bit hesitant to go in to the doctor and get those health forms completed that we needed for the licensing paperwork. We had to be flexible in scheduling our classes. So we understand that TIPS-MAPP can take, it's a long process. It's 30 hours, 10 weeks, 3 hours a night. And so working with families to provide, to be flexible as we could. And then I know in Winnebago, at least the sports are huge. Basketball's huge. And so if the boys made it to regional or state basketball, we would have to look at rescheduling our whole class for that week if it landed on one of those days, because the families in the community really supported, their teams and things like that. So just trying to be as flexible as we could. We often provided a meal and childcare. And so we used a little bit of that funding to be able to, a lot of times our staff would go, we'd make a little shopping list, decide, what meal they wanted. We'd ask the families a lot of times, and then our staff would cook that meal. We often didn't have enough money to have it catered, every week. That's kind of a big expense. So, but if you can offer a meal and even childcare, that takes a lot of that burden off of our families, to find their own childcare, to get themselves fed and get to class on time and all of those things. So we just tried to we tried to make it as easy for them as possible, because we know it was a huge commitment. Just that extra level of family engagement throughout the process. Sometimes we had to plant that seed a couple different times. Just respecting the family and their other commitments. And so trying to engage them, get them engaged with the process as respectfully as we could, because we wanted to give them that time. We didn't want to keep pushing and pushing, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're following up with families. And so trying to get to that extra level of family engagement with them. And what we found were that there were many families in our communities that were already relative caregivers. And so when we were recruiting, they had their kind of thoughts and expectations as being like a relative caregiver already. And so a lot of this licensing, process was new to them. And it can be pretty invasive when you're talking about the home study and home visits and that many hours of training and all the things that we were kind of requiring. So sometimes it was like, well, I'll just stay a relative caregiver. I don't want to go through the process, the full process. There was sometimes concerns regarding background checks. Oftentimes in some of our Native families, there's multiple generations living in a home. There's several families that could be living in a home. And so there might be, the main family that we're trying to license, might not have an issue, but then some of the family members that live within their home, there could be an issue on background checks for that. So that came up sometimes just as concerns, and we tried to walk them through what that process was and some of the things that they could, that might come up, that might stop them, just so to make them feel a little bit more comfortable with that. So some of our recruitment strategies that we use in Native American communities, really reaching out to some of our partners in the community. So we have like the school, the hospital, workers there. And what we found was, even if they're not members of the community, they're familiar. If they work within the community, they're familiar with the community. They're familiar with the people and working with Native American individuals and families. And so it was helpful to have, even if they were non-Native, families sign up because they knew the community. So really reaching out to those partners, even churches, a lot of the other organizations in the community. So we would try to get the information out there and do visits, from our workers to those sites to see if anybody was interested, or if we could hang up our materials for our recruitment activities and things like that. The other thing is that our current families are the best recruiters. So like I said, we had a lot of relative placement families already. And then as they started to become licensed, word of mouth is going to get out. They're going to, be talking about their experience. But it really was, hey, I already have these children. You're a family member as well. You should consider getting licensed. And so a lot of that was like word of mouth and families talking to other family members about helping out, right? And taking children in. We use the team approach. It takes more than one person, to recruit and, go through this whole licensing process, train the families, and then try to provide that retention and that support after. So it really takes a team. And throughout this grant, when the grant was initially funded, we were able to have like a half-time, a part-time recruiter. But we worked together as tribes within Nebraska as well to approach the state and request, more funding for this type of support. We knew that a half a worker, 0.5 FTE was not going to cut it. It wasn't going to allow us to do the work that we needed to do as far as recruiting, training, licensing, and then that ongoing support and retention. So that was part of the team approach as well. Customer service plan. This is so important from the minute they walk in your agency door, right? To treat them with respect and to answer their questions or to get them to the right person. So part of this grant was coming up with customer service plans for each site. And a big thing that we found was the follow through needed to be, better. We needed to be timely, needed to get to the right person, right? The message to the right person's desk to make sure that we were reaching back out to these families. We were answering their questions, that we would strike while the iron's hot, right? If they're interested, they probably needed a call back within a few days of whatever, recruitment activity that we had put on that they came to. Helping the families feel comfortable. I can't stress that enough, in the customer service plan, really making them feel comfortable throughout the whole process, not like we're going to come in and during the home study, I'm going to come in with white gloves and check for dust and, check all your bedrooms and cupboards. And, there is part of that, but you have to kind of talk them through it. If you feel like they're a little bit nervous about that or a little bit hesitant, there's a way to talk to them and hopefully get them a little bit more comfortable, right, with the process. And then licensing relative caregivers, that was, we had a huge amount, that's what a majority of our caretakers were. They were caring for their relatives. And so that's, we really had to kind of talk to them and convince them, to become licensed, or what the benefits, I guess, were to becoming licensed. Misty, did you have anything to add? I know we were supposed to do that slide together.
I put this in the chat, but my approach and my philosophy was always to take care of the families because they're taking care of our children. And also, as the director, it was always my philosophy was to take care of my workers because they are the ones that are working with the families. But even though I did a lot of direct contact as well, direct services, but that was always my philosophy that I took in when working with the families. And we did the TIPS, when we did the TIPS-MAPP training, you know, I really tried to take care of the families.
Thank you. All right, so this slide just is showing the additional impacts of the NF4NC grant. So we are still doing the work. It never ended after the 5-year grant, which would have started in, let's see, it started in 2013, the October of 2013. And so we had it for 5 years, but we since then have been continuing to try to become foster care experts, right? Licensing, background checks, home studies, recruitment, building up our team, because like I said, there was only funding for half-time recruiters. And so it was hard to become a foster care expert if you were so busy trying to manage all of these homes and get them all licensed. And so really working on getting that extra funding, building that team in that position, those positions up to become those foster care experts. A lot of the sites that we worked with, the tribes improved their policies and procedures, their forms, their home studies, you know, all of those things were improved. And so continuing to carry those out and make additional changes and improvements if needed. The collaboration among the Nebraska tribes, that I can't speak to that enough. You know, we really work together, not only as tribes, but then, you know, kind of becoming that united front when we met with the state and different people where we had to advocate for funding, for services for our Native families and our Native children. And so I can't speak to that enough, because that's what allowed us to come together to advocate for more funding and better services. Utilizing 4E, right? If you're licensing homes, you're going to have access to that 4E funding. So whether you have it direct or if you have a agreement with the state, you know, if that flows through there, you're going to be able to access that funding versus using your own resources. The Quick Ag Grant Quality Improvement Center for Adoption and Guardianship, that was kind of an extension that was at Winnebago specifically. Through that grant, we were able to work on our tribal code around customary adoption, the family group decision-making process. That was the process that we worked on through that grant. And that was all about bringing the whole family, right? Extended family together to make decisions. And so of course that's gonna help when more family comes around and we have more family options to place children with. And then we can work on starting them on that licensing process. And then the development of Native American TIPS-MAPP trainers and further development of the TIPS-MAPP NA curriculum. So I can't speak enough to this one, because we were really fortunate to have like when we first started the NF4NC grant, Misty was able to train with 2 experienced trainers, but she was able to train our first NF4NC group in the TIPS-MAPP curriculum. That allowed us to go out and take it back to our sites and start leading some of those first groups. And then through that whole process, we were able to make more changes to the Native American curriculum, additions that needed to be made. Misty was able to train another group. And in that process, there's been 3 other Indigenous nationally certified trainers that were developed. So Misty became a master trainer and helped develop myself, and then Gwen Vargas Porter, and Liz Lovejoy Brown. And so we're all from from the Midwest, you know, all from this area. And so it was easier to get together to get these trainings done and allow us to train the TIPS-MAPP Native American, you know, leader groups, and allow us to become nationally certified. So that was all, some of that was done within that grant, those grant years. And then a lot of it has been ongoing and done, you know, afterwards and continuing. And then Jill and one of our other NICWC employees, Sammy, they're in training to be trainers as well. So we're going to have several Native American nationally certified trainers after this whole process. Okay, I think that's where I feel like I talked a lot, so I'm turning it over to, is it Jill?
Yes, it is me. Thank you so much, Chiara. No, you have it so much of the good content that we really needed to get out there to people. So I'm glad that you spent as much time as you did and shared as much as you did. And I'm going to move through some of my parts pretty quick, but we just thought we'd throw in there, along with what Chiara was saying and wanting to continue this work, is that that's what Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition is really working toward. And with Misty as the only master trainer of the TIPS-MAPP NA program, and Chiara and Gwen and Liz certified, and then others of us in the process of that certification, we know that NICWC can be very instrumental in pushing that forward, and that really goes well with our three main focus areas of advocacy, education, and bringing people together. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat our website address, so if you want to learn more at all about us and the other things that we do and what our mission and value are, please feel free to go to our website and check that out. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Misty to keep us moving on.
Thank you, Jill and Chiara. So like they said, this has really been a journey, and I will be honest with you, when we started out and I got trained in what at the time was PS-MAPP, I really did not have any intentions on becoming what's called a master trainer. And we always kind of laugh about it because the ladies, they call me their sensei. And I kind of want them to call me Master Splinter because, but I didn't have the intentions of becoming, at that level. I just wanted to offer the program to our tribe and to our community. And so as we did that, we took it back, Clarissa LaPlante and I took it back to our tribe. And as we were implementing it, we were keeping track of like what works well, what doesn't work well in Indian country. And then there were some things that I switched up on the fly on, like, because it was like deer in the headlights look of. And so we switched it up to things that I knew and what I was familiar with and what made sense to me as an Indigenous person on like life cycle stuff and all of that. So, and so out of that became the TIPS-MAPP NA. And then we also have Caring for Our Own and Deciding Together. All of these programs are owned by the Children's Alliance of Kansas. So we've had a long-standing relationship with Children's Alliance, and that relationship continues to grow and develop as we go on. But you can go on to the next slide. So this is the Caring for Our Own program, and it is a 9-week, 27-hour support group designed to provide kinship and relative caregivers with assistance and ideas. And what I really like about Caring for Our Own is it takes on that support group type feel. And if you're familiar with TIPS-MAPP, Caring for Our Own has a little bit more leniency with changing things up and the order of things and what, and it really gives kind of that ownership of the group to the parents and the caregivers, because that's what we hear a lot. What we heard a lot about, is we talked about licensing, and they were going through TIPS-MAPP, and these are, I'm talking about relative and kinship care providers. They're like, wait, I don't need to learn how to be a parent. And I can understand where they were coming from with that. And so this really gives it more of a support group feel to it. These are the implementation, the outcomes of implementation of Caring for Our Own. So like I said, it really gives support to relative and kinship caregivers. Really, it takes a lot of the activities and some of the teachings with TIPS-MAPP, and we talk about it a little bit, and then we kind of let them run with it on what do they need help with, these are some of the behaviors they've seen, and this is some of the ways that they have dealt with it. Or maybe they're learning from each other on, well, we had that problem, but this is what, and we tried this and this worked. It's so it gives that more of a support group feel to it. You can go to the next slide. We've talked a lot about TIPS-MAPP NA, and I want to say good job to Jackie because she got this all out in our introduction. TIPS-MAPP, again, it means trauma-informed partnering for safety and permanence-model approaches in partnerships and parenting. And the NA is the Native American edition. And really what TIPS-MAPP NA is all about is it's all about helping the family to prepare for that decision to foster and adopt. And so to really look at their family and what they are able to provide, and to think about ages, genders, maybe some of the behaviors that they are able and willing to, and some behaviors that they don't think that they can handle. Having them think about their own trauma and triggers and all of that, and to think about, well, maybe that is, say, for example, somebody that has been sexually abused, maybe they aren't comfortable with dealing with that, but maybe they've also taken that trauma and turned it into a strength where they feel like they can address those type of issues. And so that's really the purpose of TIPS-MAPP NA. And you can go to the next slide. Deciding together is really the one-on-one version of TIPS-MAPP. And once you learn TIPS-MAPP, you could really do deciding together. You can go to the next slide. So these are the tools of the TIPS-MAPP program. Really, it is more than just a curriculum for education and training. It's really about the licensing process. And so all of these things are implemented into those 10 weeks. So really by the time of their 10 weeks, they should be, you should be able to license them. And, I know that there is a big push for more virtual training. We have changed things up where it can be done virtually, as things have had to change with the, with the pandemic, and everything has changed to virtual. TIPS-MAPP has also had to make a lot of those changes. And so we have done a lot of work in that area, and right now as we speak, actually TIPS-MAPP is being updated again, and which is always a good thing, because there's always things that we are learning. And it goes the same with on the Native American version. I really feel like as we as trainers and learn, grow, and develop, so does the program. And so this really is, like I said, it's a licensing program. And so by the time they are done, you should be able to have those family consultations. There's 2 family consultations. Everything that they do goes into a file that can be used for licensing, which includes, we go through the family's strengths and needs, and help them to decide, figure out what are their strengths, what are their needs, and then eventually we get to the summary and recommendations. But all of these things all build up to the final licensing, which the usually tribes and states require 21 hours of education to be able to be licensed. And so that's a part of it, but there's also other pieces of it as well. So the 12 criteria is,
I was
oh.
going to talk about this part, Misty, if that's all right. I'll give you a little bit of a break.
Thank you.
So the 12 criteria are things that are part of the program, and they were listed in that previous slide as one box, but this is something that we refer back to during each session that we do with either leaders of the group and or with families who are being trained in the curricula. And so every piece and every activity relates to at least one or more parts of these 12 criteria. And it's something that we refer back to throughout all of the activities, as you can kind of see. One of the things that part of the program is that there's posters that we've got, and there's one that has this specifically. What someone envisioned for our Native families is to cut that out and put them into like a circle for it to be more culturally responsive in that manner, in that circular way of thinking rather than a linear way of thinking. And I really love that idea a lot, and it seems to have worked for us. So I'm not going to necessarily read through all of those, but I think you guys can see that. One that I'll point out to you that I'm not a super huge fan of is this terminology of being a loss and attachment expert. I'm not sure that anybody can be an expert in that ever. So that's something that I try to sort of point out, is that everybody experiences that differently, and I can't be an expert in what you're feeling and vice versa. And so, but definitely becoming aware of those issues and situations that could potentially happen with our kids as they come into our homes is very, very important on that loss and attachment piece. And we spend quite a lot of time on that. The next slide is just about the 4 components. And this really gets to the heart of what Misty was talking about, it being a preparation and mutual selection process. So it's not only the trainers of the leaders of the group assessing the foster parents. The foster parents are really encouraged all throughout the way to really assess where their family is with all of these things, how they feel like they can work with kids if there are certain issues that they just know they can't work with, or ages based on their family composition already in their home, or any number of those things. Those things are all given very serious consideration, and the families have road work that they take home with them. And so it's really that you see the arrows going all the way around in more of a circular motion, right? There's not any one piece that's more important than any other piece. The families really have the opportunity to get as much information as they can, ask as many questions as they can, and then be able to make a very informed decision for their own family and their life as it stands right now about moving forward and taking kids in. And sometimes we have families that will opt into, I don't know if we're ready for a full-time placement, but maybe we can provide respite care, or maybe we can be a cultural connection for a child in someone else's home right now. Different things like that, different ways of encouraging families to continue to be involved in working with our kids when they come into care, even if they can't become a placement right now. So there's a lot more information on the Children's Alliance website about all of these curricula, and I did put that into the chat a little while ago. If you want me to do that again, I certainly can.
So these are all of the tribes that I have worked with, and that we have worked with with training, and have been trained on TIPS-MAPP NA. I guess, whether or not they're still using it, I am not 100% sure. And if I see Sandy put in the chat, I would love to sit in a TIPS-MAPP NA class again. She was one of the trainees at the Prairie Band Potawatomi. But we have the 4 tribes in Nebraska: Prairie Band Potawatomi, Eastern Band Cherokee, Hickory Apache, Confederated Salish and Kootenai, and Jemez Pueblo. So those are some of the tribes that we've trained already. I think I've gotten them all. And so I put a Google Doc into the chat. If you are interested in any one of these trainings, we are planning a caring for our own training in the fall, and we were trying to decide if we should also do a TIPS-MAPP or not. It kind of depends on how much interest we get in that. So if you're interested, please do that Google Doc, and we can get an idea of how many we would possibly have for for a training. Oh, awesome. I see Sandy she said it's still used at Prairie Band. Awesome. We can go to the next slide. I think that's our final slide. And if anybody has any questions or comments, we have some time for some discussion. So let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, we sort of flew through the last part of it, but partly because we know there's websites out there that have the information on there and we could direct you to that. And we wanted to make sure we explained the Diligent Recruitment Grant fully, but also, I don't know if Misty mentioned, follow us on our social media. We post on the social media anytime we're going to be offering caring for our own training for facilitators, anytime we're going to be offering other types of training, etc. So our social media handles, I guess, is that what you call them? I don't know. They're there. So, and our contact information.
This is fantastic. I was able to do a little bit up and close with you guys years ago from when we were the NRC. So I love seeing how this has come to fruition and then just how it continues to be carried forward. So you really posed some really good questions for the group. I don't know, again, if anybody has, of the attendees out there, you have questions for our presenters, they're here, they're available. We still have some time. So feel free to either unmute or you could put your questions in the chat room. And I think did I hear you correctly, Misty, that you will be offering this training if there's enough folks who are expressing interest?
Yeah, we haven't done, we typically do TIPS-MAPP training about once a year. That's kind of what it turns out to be. And we kind of like the fall, just because, yeah, I know everybody is so busy in the summertime and, with powwows and, ceremonies and different things like that. So the last one that we had was 100% virtual. And so we've been thinking about ways that we can maybe make it virtual and in person. So like maybe part of it is virtual and then part of it is in person. I do like the in person. It is fun to get to see people and to visit with people. I just know, like, I get tired of being on Zoom all day, every day. So we've kind of been thinking about that, kind of a hybrid approach. That was actually came out of one of the last training that we had, because it is a lot. It actually, the TIPS-MAPP training is, I want to say total, it's like over 40 hours to be trained in TIPS-MAPP. Caring for own is like 36. I want to say, I don't know. I can't count today. It is a lot to be trained in TIPS-MAPP, but like I said, it's we go through all of the sessions, we practice, we give them a chance to practice, we provide feedback, and there's also all of those other program tools that we had talked about. Mm-hmm. So it is quite a bit, and we really do go in depth, and we really try to develop our leaders that we call them to be ready and be prepared to take the program back to mm-hmm. their communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I hear that, and I loved even what you just said in the beginning, just about, the families are your bigger recruiters. Once they walk through this and they know that their spirits have been recognized and honored in this work and how they care for their children, I feel like, that gives them that sense of ownership, responsibility, belonging, and then that's what gets carried through into our community. So I absolutely love the approach that you guys have used with this curriculum, what's happening in Nebraska. So if there are no further questions, Laura will be following this presentation, all the participants, with the evaluation. I know she also put something in the chat room for folks, but she can also put your information about your website, and all of your contact information in that email as well. So folks can email you directly. They don't need to come through us at CBCT, but truly at the Capacity Building Center for Tribes, I just want to thank you. This is what we really aim to do, is, you know, honoring and highlighting your voice, your work out there in Indian country. So tribes can learn from one another. So stay tuned. Next week on the 8th, we'll hear from Anchorage, from the tribes up in Alaska, and they'll continue this conversation. But again, just want to say thank you, Miigwech, from the bottom of my heart. May you all have ease, and give you back a few minutes today.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.